This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, interviews and conversations. Welcome to the podcast. This is Mark, and my guest today is a book reviewer and friend who's been sort of part of my sphere for several years now. It's Terri Schlichenmeyer. Terri, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How?
I'm doing well. And by the way, when I first got to know who you were, you used the handle the Bookworm. Do you still do that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And so the listeners know Terri is a syndicated book reviewer, and I was hoping to catch up with you, one, and also to just learn about how you got to be in that position. Let's start with the 411 on Terri Schlichenmeyer. Who are you? Where are you? What is your life like?
I am old enough to know better, but young enough to not pay attention to that. I am in Wisconsin. I'm about 30 miles from the Mississippi River, so I'm on, if you know where Milwaukee is, everybody does. If you know where Milwaukee is, I'm on the other side of the state. I live in the middle of 3 acres. We have a very large yard, and we're working on a garden. So my office right now, because it was 18 degrees on Sunday morning, my office is full of tomato plants that will be going into the ground not soon enough for me. I live in a house with my significant other and 2 little monster dogs and 15,000 books. I've been reading books since I was probably 2 or 3 back in the 60s when mothers were home all the time. My mom taught me to read to get me out of her hair. And so I've been reading since I was 2 or 3. And I have been reading ever since.
Now that book count has gone up 2,000. Your profile...
Has it?
Yes, because
okay.
when I post your book reviews, it says 13,000 books.
Okay, well, technically I'm somewhere between 15 and 17. We built this house almost 2 years ago. And when we packed, it literally took a year, almost to the day, to pack all the books. And I weeded them as I went through. And so I don't have an exact count, because when everything is unpacked, then I will rebuild my database, and then I will know how many books I have.
Well, I was going to ask you, if you does that mean you keep all of the books that you read?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not only do I not have room, but I have a few novel authors that I keep. I don't keep all the novels. Definitely don't keep all the nonfiction. I don't have room for business books anymore. I have a few that I really liked or that I found very helpful, but most everything, I would say 93 out of 100 books I read go to the library.
Oh, I bet you they appreciate that, though.
They are very, 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 very happy to get those things. Yeah. Library, and by the way, go to your library. Go there today, because libraries need you, and they will help you. In my eyes, booksellers and librarians are superheroes because they know stuff. I've never known a librarian who can't tell you exactly what you need, even if you don't need it. Even if you don't know what you need. Talk to a librarian. Go in. Libraries have had their budgets slashed terribly in the last 4 years, and they need your support. So go to the library today. Booksellers are amazing people. Booksellers know too what you're looking for. The classic within bookstores, if you want to see a bookseller roll her eyes, is to say, there was a book that you had on a table in the front of the store, and the cover was blue. Do you still have that? Because the bookseller will very silently turn away and roll her eyes before she tells you no. So go talk to a bookseller too.
On libraries, I remember going to being an avid library goer when I was a kid in Elkhart, Indiana. Had a library card, I remember that, and because I was a big reader. I grew up in a house without books, which was weird because my father, I don't know if he even ever read a book, but there were no books in the house. But my sister Kathy and I were both big readers, and that's a lot of where my vocabulary came from, because I would read.
Mhm.
I would read Poe, and I would read all of these things, these books with words, and I didn't know what they meant, so I would look them up. But I loved going to the library, you know.
The library when I was 10, my grandmother started taking me into the library in this eensy-weensy little town I grew up in. And when I say eensy-weensy, I'm talking about less than, I would venture to guess, 1,000 people in a 5-mile radius. The library was open for 2 hours, sometimes maybe on a Saturday morning, kind of. If the lady got out of bed and she felt well, then she'd go open the library. And it was one room that I would say was maybe 20 feet square, heated with an old oil burner that she had to stoke up, and it was filled with old books. And by the time I was probably 13, I'd read everything in that library that I was going to read, and they never, ever, ever got anything new unless somebody comes off the books, and then the librarian would just put them on the shelf. So it was a unique situation, but I did have books in the house when I grew up. We had encyclopedias, and my mom got me involved in all kinds of, kid book clubs, I had a book when I was a child called Mumsy Goes to Kindergarten. And the story goes that my mother, that was the first book I ever remember reading. And
voice
so sick of me reading it that she hid it at one point, but I found it. So, I mean, it was, I've always had books in my life. I can't remember ever being very far away from something to read.
Now, how did you get into reviewing books?
My book habit started it. My ex complained very long and loud and hard about my books because I was spending too much money and it was taking too much time. And so I worked at a bookstore at that time, which sounds funny because I wasn't supposed to be bringing home more books, and of course I did. But I learned at the bookstore that publishers put out pre-advanced copies, pre-pub copies, and I learned because bookstores get those sometimes, not a lot, but they get those pre-pub copies. And I learned that it was a thing. Well, I started thinking, what can I do with this information? And I was working at a radio station full time at the time, and I said to the talk show program director, "Can I do book reviews on the radio? Like once a week or something like that." And he said, "Yeah, sure, fine." So I went back up to my desk. I was a copywriter there. I went back up to my desk, and I started doing a little bit of digging to find out how I could put the two together: free pre-pub books and radio reviews. Well, eventually I figured out how to do that, and I did radio reviews for probably about a year, a little more than a year, when a friend of mine came to me and said, "I work part-time at a newspaper over in Minnesota. Would you like to do some book reviews for us?" Okay, sure. So I started writing for them and making mistakes and making even more mistakes, but actually sometimes doing good work and having fun. I mean, I look back at some of the things I've written back there, and I'm alternately horrified and fascinated this time, and that was a long time ago. And so after a while, I began to realize that newspapers probably didn't have a book reviewer. A lot of them didn't. So I started doing some research in that respect in newspapers and the newspaper industry and the newspaper business. And I started calling around to some editors and sending them some samples that I've been doing for the small paper in Minnesota. And I signed on a client, and then I signed on 2, and then I lost 1, and then I signed on 5, and then I lost 4, and it just kind of grew from there.
And how long has this been going on?
I started doing radio reviews in late 2002. I've been doing print reviews since probably mid-2003. So it's been just about 17 years.
Wow. And has your style of reviewing changed? I mean,
absolutely.
Because you seem to have a fairly set word limit. I don't know. I would think so as a syndicated syndicated
and
thing.
I've kind of always had a set word limit because in print you have a certain amount of space that you fill, and that's what you fill. You don't have the luxury of adding another page, because then you have to add a whole another page, and then you got to fill that page.
Mm-hmm.
So I will, if you tell me that you have X number of columns, space, inches to fill, that's what I'm going to fill. And the word count sometimes I'm sure gets edited. Most of the time what I see it doesn't, and that's okay. Style, yeah, I've changed that a lot. Sometimes there are things that just don't work, and I recognize that pretty early on. I haven't changed my style a lot in a good number of years. I do try to change things up a little bit every now and then. If you're a longtime reader of my column, you'll see that they have basically the same format, which people have come to, as I understand, have come to expect.
Mm-hmm.
As far as shaking it up, though, sometimes I'll do a little something out of the ordinary, because I read 4 or 5 books a week, and sometimes I catch myself calling it in. All right, here we are, blah blah blah, and I pull back from that. The second I see it, I pull it back. I'll ditch a review so fast and rewrite it, because it needs to be it can't obviously called in.
Yeah. And what kind of migration have you had from print to online? Do you have a lot of online clients? I would imagine you might, because there's not a lot of print out there.
That's an answer I can't exactly tell you, because that you can put it online, you can put it in both. I don't care.
Okay.
The bottom line is I want people to know about these books. And so I can't exactly tell you how many are print only, how many are e-reviews only, or how many are a hybrid of both. I don't know.
Well, that makes sense. I just thought you might have some clients that were strictly websites, like mine.
I think I know I have a handful of them,
mm-hmm.
but I don't know who's strictly this or strictly that.
Okay.
That's a question I can't answer, because no one tells me.
Now, what are your? I got a few more questions. What's your favorite genre? Not as it might be as a reviewer, but what's your some of your favorite genres to read for Terri?
I am a geek. I like science and I like history. Those are my 2 favorite things. As I'm unboxing the books in my library, I'm finding that I have a lot of science books, and history fills a wall. I also am very into trivia books. I've got probably 8 or 10 bookcases full of trivia books, because I have fun, and they're light reading, and they're pick it up and put. But I love reading medical stories of doctors, which is interesting because needles and things make me cringe and do things funny like faint. So I like medical stories. I love science. I forget sometimes how much I like Westerns. And I don't read a lot of Westerns, and then all of a sudden I get one and I think, oh, I have to read that, because I forget that.
Oh.
love history. I love more 20th century history. I like social history, that kind of thing. So those are, if you turn me loose in a bookstore, the nonfiction section is where I'm going to head every single time.
All right, because I was going to ask you about if this was historical fiction. You're talking nonfiction.
No, I'm not a historical fiction fan because I want to know the real story. I don't want to know. I don't want to know a maybe. I don't want to know something that is possibly made up or based on. No. Tell me the real story, because that's, to me, that's so much more interesting.
Now, how do you select the books that you review? Because you're getting them from publishers, I understand,
right,
for the most part. Yeah.
I have targets I need to hit. I need to do 2 business books a month. I need to do at least 2 books for LGBTQ readers.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do 2 health books. So I take out of my closet everything for that month. I just did this last week. So I took all of the books that were possible for June, and I put them on the credenza, and I started weeding them. I'm not interested in that. This looks good. I like this author. I don't like this author, but other people do. So I just
like
a handful of what looked good, looked interesting, looked possible, and went from there. I choose X number of books per week, and I usually pick 2 or 3 things to set aside in case something drops out, because something always does. And so that's how I pick. It's so very unscientific that it's shocking.
And what kind of I was just thinking, the supplier, like a drug supplier. Who do you how your supply is just reliable and constant?
I'm sorry, I just didn't hear that you broke up. I'm sorry. Would you repeat that? Your
supply, the publishers. Are you getting books sent to you every week? Is that never ending? How does that work?
Before the pandemic, I was getting a lot more. I have not. Things are loosening up now. I'm starting to get more now. I used to get, before the probably 40 or 50 books a week. I have things on my shelf that come out in November. So these are really early publications. I've had a September book since January. Now I'm not getting quite as many. Now I'm getting a few PDFs. For me, eBooks are hard in my eyes. I did an ebook last week, and I woke up the next morning. So I do a lot of. I'm starting to do ebooks, but it's, for me personally, it's something I need to try to figure out how this is going to work. Sunglasses, maybe. I don't know. I'm not sure how to do this yet.
Okay. Well, let me see if I think of a few more questions. I don't even know how I found you. It's been a few years, but I was looking for content for the website LGBT.
Did I call you?
Did
I call you? Maybe I did.
I don't think so.
I think I called you. Maybe you did find me.
Do you email? Either. Do you call or you email?
I call.
Huh.
I always call. Email is too easy to ignore.
Well, that's true. But nowadays, if I don't know somebody, I don't answer the phone.
Yeah, and that's true now. One of these days, I'm not going to be able to get a hold of anybody. I don't know what I'm going to do. So,
now,
I don't remember how we found one another. I really don't.
We did, though, and then we met in New York City when you went to the book convention there.
Yes, and it was so wonderful meeting you.
Frank says hi.
I'm sorry?
Frank says hello.
Oh, hello, Frank. Yeah, and Frank, his smile just warms my heart. It's just, every time I see Frank smile, it makes me smile.
Now, is this, you're going to do this for the rest of your life? What's your future hold in terms of being a book reviewer? Because it's your full-time job. So what's going on in years from now?
In 10 years from now, I can't. What do you do when you retire? You travel and you sit home and read. already doing that.
Yeah.
I go to at least one book conference a year, and I'm the only white member of the Black Press. So I go to Black Press meetings every year, 2 if I can, but at least during the summer meeting. And I read. So what, if I retired, what would change?
Yeah.
Pretty much not anything. I someday in 10 years, I hope to not be killing myself 4 books a week or 5 books a week. I can see myself just doing 1 or 2. But then, to be realistic, it'll probably be 4 anyway, because that's just the way I read. I have multiple books going at any one time. I've got 1 in the bedroom, I have 1 in the living room, and I have 1 here in my office that I'm looking at. So I in a perfect world, but really, why?
Yes, I understand that, and it sounds like you've been doing something that you love to do. You know, I personally, it takes me a long time to read 1 book now. It's changed. I used to probably read a book every week or so, but if I was like doing it for a living, I could see myself hating, like never wanting to read another book. You know.
The bad news is that, and people say to me, "Oh, I wish I could do what you do," and I understand that, but the bad news is I have to read the bad books too.
That's true.
And sometimes people, this is a question people ask me often. When I get a bad book, what do I do with it? And if it's, and this just happened last night, I had a book that was good but inappropriate, and I could see where it was going to go, and I was maybe 10 pages into, and so I put it aside, and maybe later, but maybe not. It wasn't a bad book. It just wasn't right.
Yeah.
So I got one that was. In the case of a book that's really awful, if I'm only 10 pages or 15 pages or even 20 pages into it, and it still stinks to the sky,
call me in it.
Into it, no, I have to, and then I have to be honest that this book really stunk.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you good things about a book that wasn't great, because I'll tell you neutral things. I'm not going to tell you good things about it. I'm not going to be bubbly about something that I didn't like, because that's not fair to you. If you head to the bookstore with your money in your hand or your credit card in your pocket, you buy that book. And so I have to be honest. If a book is bad, I'm going to tell you. Or if it's just not quite right, I'm going to tell you that.
Yes, that's your job.
It's my job. So that's what I do with the Stinkeroo. Is I have several ways, and it depends on how far I get into it. I've had books that were wonderful for the first 40 pages, and then the author really goes south, and I have to say that. I've had kids' books that a number of years ago I did an audiobook that was Bible stories, and it was good. It was well done, actual Bible stories, and the thing was that the Noah's Ark that you would have probably picked up for a 3 or 4 year old.
Mm-hmm.
But inside were stories of death and killing and war and murder. And I thought, holy cow, if you had that in your car while you're taking your 3-year-old to daycare, oh, heck no. That I look for too is it appropriate for the kind of reader who's looking at it? So those are the bad things in my job, and I if you want to even call them bad.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, I don't know if it's going to come out on this recording, but you break up a couple times. I'm sure I do too. It's just, maybe it's everybody being on the line now, but it was like there was almost a another person coming in on there. It was so strange.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know I don't know if it's even going to show up on the recording. But we're going to wrap it up now. I just wanted to ask you if any faves so far into 2020, any books you're like, oh my gosh, everybody should read this.
Yes, I wrote down 4 of them because I was thinking you were going to ask that. Half Broke by Ginger Gaffney is a book about a woman who works on a prison ranch with prisoners and horses, and the ranch is in New Mexico. She's a lesbian. She doesn't talk much about it. She more talks about her relationship with horses and her relationship with the prisoners and their relationship with the horses. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely beautiful. The Lost Diary of M is one of those rare historical fiction books. It's a diary of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's mistress, and it's shocking. It's so mesmerizing. You almost forget that it's a novel. Pelosi came out last Tuesday, the 5th of May, and it's a biography about Nancy Pelosi, and I was prepared to not like it, but I liked it a lot. Shows a different side of her, and it also explains a lot of the holes that you have in your head about Washington, D.C. Very, very good book. And true to what I said earlier about Westerns, I love the new book by Tom Clavin called Tombstone. And it's a history book. It's a little funny, but a lot very fascinating. So those are my four picks. For sure, read Half Broke. I would have to say that's one of my favorite books this year.
When did that come out?
February, I believe.
Okay. I will look for that, and I will look for your reviews ongoing. And it's so nice to catch up with you and speak to you again. I haven't heard, because I haven't heard your voice since I think we were in New York, and that's got to be 4 or 5 years.
Oh, it's got to be longer than that.
Well, don't.
We haven't. We need to talk more. We need to talk more. We do.
We do. It was fun.
It was fun, and please tell Frank hello.
I will, and thanks again for coming on the show, and I'll share it with you when I'm got it all post-produced and all that stuff. So you have awesome. A good, I mean, make the most of your quarantine, your isolation.
Thank you. I'm used to it. I work from home. The boys, I have 2 little monster dogs, and they're used to having me at home, except every once in a while I used to leave, and now they're kind of like, Mom, don't you need to go somewhere? So, yeah,
Okay, Terri. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mark. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.